Good morning or good afternoon, guys. So I just recorded 6 minutes and then my phone ran out of space. So I'm like, I gotta delete stuff. So I went back and I deleted some old video. think I found like 30 minutes worth of video. I'm like, that's why I keep running out of space. I need to get rid of that stuff. But I went through all this work trying to explain what was going on, all this talking. So today I am resting. It's a Sabbath day, and you might be thinking, oh, it's a Tuesday though, right? Isn't a Sabbath supposed to be Saturday or Sunday? And actually, I thought it was this week, it was going to be on a Monday. But let me explain that, because I am using a calendar which, first of all, respects the lunar cycles as a real month. So instead of just chopping the year up into different parts from the equinoxes and everything, from the way the Gregorian calendar does it, the original calendar, the original timekeeping system, a month was just the moon going from new to full. And basically, that is considered a month, right? A natural, a real month. But a week, you might think, well, a week means 7 days. If you look it up, that's what it means. But biblically, there's basically two categories. There's a week, and then there's a new moon period. So every time there's a new moon, you celebrate, you rest, and it's not really considered part of a week. There's evidence in the Bible that shows that it wasn't even part of a week. So you'd have a new moon period, and then you'd have weeks, and the weeks consist of working days and a rest day. So there's three categories of days that are different from each other, distinct from each other. You have new moon days, you have working days, and then you have Sabbath rest days. Now, the fact that the weeks align to the month is a little, I would say, a little more nuanced, because it's pretty obvious that a real natural month just uses the moon, but it seems a little more detailed, like to realize that a week should be aligned to a month. But there's evidence for that in the scriptures. There's evidence that they would rest, that basically they would always have a Sabbath on like the 15th of the month. Which if you use a calendar this way, you have the first day of the month is a new moon day. And then you have 6 working days and then a rest day. That's going to be the 8th. And then a week later, you're going to have a Sabbath on the 15th. And there's no examples in the Bible where they had a Sabbath somewhere else. So there's a lot of evidence, there's a lot of reasoning that points to the new moon day. First of all, it's an important day. So, and there's a lot of evidence that it was never really considered part of a week. And I don't want to get too much in depth into that. Now, originally, we thought, or I should say I, and maybe some others, were considering Monday basically for this week, because when this month started, what happened was the moon's maximum. You can do this. You can go back just by observing it. Some people believe that you have to just observe it because that's what the Bible says. But then there's two ways to kind of think about what does that mean? Because you can observe it, and then you can keep a history of it, and then you can start figuring out, even if you can't see it, you can figure out when the conjunction is, when the new moon is at its most blocked. But there's some people that believe that you should just observe it every month, meaning you consider a new moon day until you see that light, that crescent beginning on the other side. And until you see that, you don't consider the next day the beginning of a week. You don't consider that current day the first. And so if you don't see it yet, you say, okay, this is not the first of a new month. This is the 30th basically of our continued month. You either have 29 or 30 days. And you say, okay, well, this is just the first of the 2-day new moon period, basically. And then until it's actually the final new moon 24-hour period where you start seeing that light crescent, that's when you know, okay, the next day is a work day. We're going to work tomorrow. So if you go by the conjunction, if you go by the maximum, then it would have been yesterday. Okay. If you go by when we could see the light, like the crescent, then it would be today, because I don't think the crescent was really visible until, well, this was a week ago, but dictating the new moon day, which would be 7 days before the first Sabbath of the month. If you can't see that light, that visible crescent, you don't know that the next day is a work day, and that determines whether that month is going to be at 29. It's going to be pretty consistent, but the issue is which day is it actually going to be that month. So the pattern will continue. It's like one of those mathematical series where you have a continued fraction, for example, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1. There are patterns. I'm not going to get into it on this video, but if you're shifted from someone else on the pattern, then your days are not going to be the same. You see what I mean? If you're trying to determine what is the correct day, what is the day, you'd still be off by a day if you determined it differently. So today I'm respecting as a Sabbath because it's 7 days from a new moon day, a day where the visible crescent was starting to appear. And since it's the 7th month, now I talked about it being the most important holiday, the beginning day of the 7th month here, right? I talked about that being the most important day. But there is another day that's going to be the most important for all time, I would say. So the Feast of Trumpets, some people were saying this is when Jesus is coming back. But really, this feast that's coming in 2 days from now, the way I'm seeing it, if you go by the conjunction, it would be in 1 day from now. But this feast that's coming is the Day of Atonement. Now, this is such an important holiday, but I don't believe it's necessarily the next in line, because the Feast of Trumpets, or the Feast of Shouting, I said that was the most important feast day of our time, because I think that's the next feast to be fulfilled in prophecy, where something big is going to happen. Although there's a minor detail that says that it's possible that that's wrong. Possible. Not for sure, though. Because if you keep them in order, it does make sense that that would be the next one to be fulfilled. But the feast, the Day of Atonement, seems like it's a surprise day. So whenever these people are talking about a rapture happening and suddenly something happening, I would say that more closely aligns to the Day of Atonement, which is going to come up here in 2 days. Now, do I think something like that will happen this year? When you read the prophecies, you read Revelation, all this stuff, you can come to whatever conclusions, right? But make sure you let the Bible interpret itself. Now, if you're looking at the feasts alone, they've all gotten fulfilled. So anyone who says they don't matter anymore, or you're just making this up, nope, Jesus died on the Passover, right? And then after there's already Christians, right? After the veil is torn, if they say, oh, we don't need the feast anymore because the veil is torn, that we're Christians, Jesus died, all these things, well, then why did the Pentecost happen where the Holy Spirit came down? That was the Feast of Weeks. So if that was the next feast, and then we have like Revelation prophecy, and they believe, because Christians, either you believe something's going to happen in the future or you don't. But even Jesus talked about it a lot. So, but there are people who want to worship Jesus without listening to him. So I'm just saying, they want to worship him and believe anything they want, but they won't listen to what he actually teaches. So they'll say, you have to believe Jesus is God, but then you have to throw out and not believe anything that Jesus teaches, basically. And that's, I don't know, that sounds strange to me. Does that sound logical to you? If Jesus is God, why would you throw out everything that he teaches? So if there's future events happening, I would expect them to line up with these feasts because they haven't really been, they're promises of God, basically. I mean, they haven't been fulfilled in their quote unquote New Testament form yet. Like there was an Old Testament and then a New Testament form for all the feasts in the first month, you know, the Passover, Feast of First Fruits, and Feast of Weeks, which is Pentecost. And now you have the seventh month. And those haven't been fulfilled yet in the New Testament form. We haven't had something happen where we say, oh, that's the fulfillment of the Feast of Shouting. That's the fulfillment of the Day of Atonement, which is a very solemn day. Feast of Shouting is like a happy, it's like an announcement type day. Day of Atonement is like, oh boy, something, you don't need an announcement. You're just scared, you're solemn, I don't know, but there's something serious about it. Or maybe it's you're being forgiven, but it's still serious because you can see the cost of it or something. And then there's the Feast of Tabernacles, which is my favorite because it's the one where we have the most fun, where there's the one where we get to go and we get to have sort of like a fall party. It's like a pumpkin patch party to the max, right? And that feast is the last one, and some people think it represents us being taken up into the heavens. Maybe the believers are taken up and the rest of the earth is, dealt with and things like that. But a Day of Atonement, the way it's positioned on the calendar, the way it's positioned in the week is different. It's shifted. It's not exactly at the beginning of a month. It's not in the middle of the month where there's a full moon. It's actually positioned in middle of it. It's 10 days in. So you have like this interesting looking crescent on the moon, right? And then you have, it begins in the evening where none of the others say explicitly they begin in the evening. You see? So it has an indicator that it represents perhaps a surprise timing or something like that. Who knows? I don't really know. But I'm just letting you guys know the most important feast of all the different ages, like of all these different times, like even before or after, I think it's going to be considered the most important one. It's going to be considered the most serious one, the most solemn one. And that's not just, right, our period of time right now. I'm talking about regardless of, thousands of years ago or into the future. This one is supposed to be a serious one, a very special day. And I hadn't realized that I originally was going to get my dog spayed on that day, and then I was thinking, oh no, that's a holiday, and it's the most important holiday, and I thought it was going to be on Wednesday, but it's actually on Thursday because you couldn't see the crescent yet, right? And I was thinking, well, I would take that day seriously because I would know that she's asleep. She would be fasting. She wouldn't have eaten or drank anything because when you put a dog to sleep to get them spayed, they can't eat anything or they could choke. So I'd be like, that's a serious day. But at the same time, if anyone does that, right? If anyone is operating, they're working. And I think you're not supposed to work or really cause anyone else to work on that day. So it's not, I'm not supposed to go do business. I'm not supposed to go. So having someone do an operation on her, having to go out and get this done, something probably better to reschedule. So it's a day that really I should fast and take seriously. And I don't always do that. I don't always take things seriously when I should. I don't always stick to things that I should. But that's what's coming up. Tomorrow, I think, is just a normal work day. Because, right, it's just a work day in the middle of the week. and I'm just going to be cleaning out my car, probably cleaning my house or something. But I just wanted to let you guys know, today I'm resting. It's the Sabbath. But because the Day of Atonement is 10 days from the beginning of the month, which is a very interesting timing because it sort of interrupts the week. Usually, I mean, the command is for a week is work 6 days and rest the seventh day. But if you have a Day of Atonement in the middle of that interrupts. So whether you work or not, I'll have to look more into that. I'll have to study that, but at least fasting, at least taking it seriously, because well, just think about the name, Day of Atonement. So I don't know what God is going to be doing here in the next few years, but people said that 100 years ago, 200 years ago. They used to think the world was going to end the next year. They used to think the world was going to end within 5 years and all these things. And, well, we're still sort of going, so. But these days are days that even if something in prophecy isn't happening at its fullest yet, you can still make something out of it. Now, I'm going to tell you guys something that I find interesting. Every time I've gone to you could call it a festival or a feast, for a Passover week or a Feast of Tabernacles, I'll go there and we'll rest on the first day and then the last day. So it sort of takes 10 days because you have to travel, before and then travel sort of after to get to where you're going. But when you rest, you don't want to be traveling. You want to just stay there, rest, and take it easy and just enjoy nature. And so if you think about that, that's an 8-day period because you have a Sabbath and then you have a week and you have the next Sabbath. So usually I think of these feasts as a 10-day period because that's sort of what I have to schedule. That's sort of what I have to prepare for. And I've never regretted going to one of these. Sometimes I think, oh, if I go to this, I'm not going to be making money, or I have to travel, or I have to, make plans to do this. But I've always been more happy that I've gone than not. Well, I haven't really not gone, but I've never thought if I hadn't gone, I rather would have done that, right? I always thought, no, it was definitely worth it. I'm glad that I went. That's what I've always felt. That's what I always thought so far. So this coming week here in the Feast of Tabernacles, I'm going to expect the same thing. I mean, I'm going to expect when I go there, I'm not going to regret having gone there. I'm going to think, no, this was a learning experience. And this is not like a typical church camp thing. This is nothing like I was a truck driver. And I was in the military. So I've been to so many churches. I've been to all sorts of Awana Club type things. I've participated in so many different trips and camps and youth groups, and I've been to camps. I've been to ministries. I've participated in so many things, talked to so many different people, missionaries, organizations. I've been involved with a lot of stuff. We'll just say that. Listened to a lot of pastors, just all over the place, all sorts of things. And you can put all of that into one category and say think of all those things as similar in some very vague, interesting, strange way that is hard to necessarily put your finger on. right? Maybe they have sort of a mindset that believes certain doctrines a certain way. They appear to be different, but they still share this acceptance of like this background doctrine. Okay, when I go to these feasts that I've been going to, they are a completely different category from all these other things. When I go to these feasts where people decide they want to follow God's laws, they know that the Sabbath is not some, it's not, it's a moral law. It's not like when they call it ceremonial law, right? That's not biblical. It's a moral law, and it's never been removed. It's never been changed. It was never nailed to the cross. When the Bible says nailed to the cross, look that up, learn what it means, right? Records of sins. It's talking about this system that Jesus was always, he wasn't rebelling against God. He was reestablishing God's laws and showing how man was rebelling against God with their own rules that they made up. Jewish rules that they made up on their own are not God's commands. So when you say Jewish means Torah and these other books, you're just deceiving yourself. You're lying to everyone, because you're saying that God is just another component of Judaism, and then so are all these other things. No, they're completely, either you following God or you're not. That's two options. There's only two options. You're either obeying what God spoke or you're not. Okay? It doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it anything you want. You can label it Jewish on this side because it's Torah, or you can label it Jewish when it's man's reasonings and man's laws, the Talmud and all that stuff. You can label it any way you want, but what matters at the end of the day, what's actually true, is it what God spoke? Is it what God commanded, or is it not what God commanded? And it doesn't matter whether somebody adds commentary to it. It doesn't matter if somebody adds other rules to it or anything like that. It's either God commanded it or God did not command it, or God commanded not to do it. But that's the separation. Either it's God or it's not God. That's where you have to decide how to categorize these ideas, these concepts. So to me, the feasts are God. The Sabbath is God. Okay? These other Jewish traditions, you have to examine them for what they are to decide, are they God or are they not God? Some of them are God, some of them are not God at all. Okay? And people will point at it and they'll just say, that's Jewish, that's Jewish, that's Jewish. Doesn't matter what they think. What matters is it God or is it not God? Because when it's God, then it's true Judaism and it's true Christianity. When it's not God, they can label it whatever they want. They can label it Christian, they can label it Jewish, they can label it Muslim. It doesn't matter. If it's not God, it's not God. If it is, they can label it whatever they want that way too. They can say, oh, that's a Christian thing. Oh, you're doing a Jewish thing. Oh, you're doing a Muslim thing. Oh, you're doing a Buddhist thing. It doesn't matter what they think, because if God commanded it, it's of God. So it's true Christian, it's true religion versus false religion. That's where you need to draw the line. Don't worry about what people label things as, because it's going to deceive you. It's going to make you think that that's what matters. Their labels are what matter instead of what God commands is what matters. Don't worry about what anybody labels anything. Doesn't matter. All that matters is it of God or is it not of God? Regardless of what anyone calls it. They could call it church or not church. They could call it synagogue or not synagogue. They could call it anything. Okay? Either it's of God or it's not of God. And these feasts coming up that I'm going to go to, my understanding is that's of God. Okay? The Sabbath is of God. So today I'm resting because I believe that is of God. Doesn't matter if you think it's Jewish or Christian or not. I believe that it's applies today and it's of God. And that Jesus would be commanding it. Jesus would be supporting it. He wouldn't be against it, okay? Because I believe that Jesus is going to be found to be consistent with everything that God would say. Okay, that's what I believe, all right? So this Feast of Tabernacles, it's the same thing. I believe that Jesus is in support of it, not against it. So that's why I'm going with it, because I also believe that it's of God. It's not something that we're just doing. And that's why I'm bringing this up. A lot of people think, oh, that's just dead old things, and we got to go to this church and everything's new. But it's the other way around. What I'm saying is I found all this life and all these people who have studied and the love that they have and the independence they have as individuals. It's nothing like any church I've been to. Ever. Every church I've always been, they always have a background policy. They always have a background. You don't see it until you experience this. Then you it's like it just like scales come off your eyes, because you start realizing they don't believe the Bible and God first. They believe their doctrines first, and then Bible and God and Jesus are like, they're just, oh yeah, nice thoughts. No, everyone at these feasts that I go to, they're all different individual people. They have completely different backgrounds. It's like think of the funnest middle school or high school group of friends that you've ever had that you just love being around. Maybe in the military, maybe in your job, maybe somewhere where you've had or even from a movie or a TV show where you just like, wow, everyone's got their own personality. That's what it's like, okay? Because everyone here, they know you just stand up for what's true. It doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything right away, because somebody's going to think one thing and somebody's going to think the exact opposite, because their way of thinking it's a completely different style of thinking. But we know truth is more important. What God says is more important. Not, we need to agree on this policy. We need to agree on this. Quite frankly, usually it's some sort of Jesuit doctrine or some sort of doctrine that comes from fallen angels or from a fallen Israel, from someone who's disobeying God, and then they want to force you to do the same thing as them. That's why you have like these missionaries that will give Bibles to these people in other countries, and then they have to go back there and they have to say, why are you keeping the Sabbath? You're supposed to be having church on Sunday. Well, it's because when they read the Bible, they didn't have church on Sunday. They never got that from their Bibles that you gave them, because their Bibles don't teach that. It's an extra doctrine that you added. That's what it is. And now you're forcing others to keep it. You'll say, oh, we're not going to fund you unless you keep this. But see, that's God's test, because he doesn't want lukewarm people. He doesn't want these people who just say, oh, we have to do what the church says. Oh, I have to make my spouse happy. I would have to make this guy or girl happy so that they'll marry me by doing their doctrine, right? God doesn't want any of that. God just wants you to love him and love others and put him first. And if you're going to do that, you're going to obey what he says, right? If you don't love him if you're not obeying the commands. If you're murdering, if you're stealing, if you're lying, right? You're coveting. I have a friend who says it's not lying, it's bearing false testimony. He believes that it means just when you're in court, not when you're stating something. But that doesn't... Think about that. Is that the character of God? I don't know. That sounds... But what happened when they were hiding and they had the prostitute hide them and protect them and say, oh, they're not here, But what really is God after here? Is he going to make it easy to just follow him and obey him? No, he wants to see who cares. I mean, I mean, if you really think about it, that's how it is in a lot of things. That's how it is if you're going to be a competitive researcher, right? If you look at these wise people, Pythagoras, Aristotle, whoever it was, they would tell you, you have to love wisdom. Somebody comes up to them and asks them, teach me wisdom. They would take your head and shove it in the water and hold you in the water until he comes up and he says, I need air, I need to breathe, says, okay, well, until you want wisdom as much as you want to breathe this air, don't talk to me. And they're not doing that to be mean. They're not psychopaths. Trust me, he's not drowning someone because he's just like this jerk. He literally is actually showing an illustration. He's actually showing the guy, like, this is actually how much you have to desire. If you don't feel this like hunger like this for wisdom, you're not going to understand all these things that I'm thinking about, all these things that I'm researching, because it's going to be impossible. There's not going to be enough, you don't have enough desire to learn. So you're not going to learn anything. You're at this level, you're not going to actually genuinely be able to learn anything. If you want wisdom that bad, if it's like oxygen to you, then you're starting to realize what this is that I'm doing. You're starting to realize this game, right? That's what they would do. That's what they would teach. And it's the same thing with God. It's the same thing with following Jesus. It's like he doesn't want to push people away. He just knows if you actually are going to follow him genuinely, if you actually care, you'll realize he's not just playing some game. He's not just saying believe A instead of believe B, and that's the magical answer. No, he says you have to actually care about truth. You have to care about what's righteous. It has to become your nature. You have to love God genuinely. This has to be you have to realize that this isn't some game. This is real. This is no joke. You have to genuinely make it your own nature, your own desire, and you have to let that grow in you. You have to actually love truth and righteousness. Like if you're not offended by injustice, if you don't care about whether the world is breeding evil in killing off good, if that doesn't bother you, then you're not going to have any way to sift out all the falsehood and learn and grow and create the kingdom of heaven. You can't do that because you don't have the power within you. You don't have the light and the grace within you. You need something like that, right? So this is the feast, okay, that I go to. This is not a typical church camp at all. Whenever I'd go to those things, it's like, okay, I'd participate, we'd sing some songs or whatever, we'd talk about some sort of Bible verse, and you don't realize it. You feel like it's good enough, it's real enough, okay, but this is like, Neo was one guy in the Matrix. He wasn't everyone. Okay, maybe there was one guy who could tell, who could feel, I feel like I'm in the Matrix, right? But most people were like, they didn't know. They didn't realize, no, we're in the Matrix, right? They don't understand because they don't actually understand. They don't have even the capacity to comprehend that there's something more real. And this feast that I go to, this is more real, quite frankly, than all these church camps and these, Sunday Bible churches and all these things. These are people who who they're going there because they believe this is the right thing to do. They're not going there because it's easy for them, because it makes them money, because the rest of the world does it. So if you think about that, it's like going to a university. You could be valedictorian at your high school, but all those students at your high school were only there because they had to go. Okay? So you feel like you're smart, right? But then as a valedictorian, now you go to this top university, right? You go to MIT, right? And suddenly you're like the village idiot, because you start to realize you just broadened you now have a selection of like all of the world's brightest minds all coming to the same spot. So you got the brightest minds from all these different places, and now they're competing at the next tier up. And you realize, wow, they actually are way smarter, and it's way harder to compete and way harder to do all these classes, and the tests are way harder, and everything's 100 times harder, 10 times harder, twice as hard, whatever it is. But it's not the same, because only the brightest minds, only the best of the best, only the ones that would study all the time are going there. And now you really have to reconsider, am I really like valedictorian, or as just happen to be of that little school? Am I only 1 in 500 rather than 1 in 100,000? You see? So that's how it is going to these feasts. These other people at these feasts, I'm not saying you have to be intimidated. I'm not saying it's like that. It's not like going to a school where everyone's like smarter, okay? But it is like going to a place where everyone actually is more maybe freed from the world's way of thinking. They're more natural. They're more independent in their thought processes. They have their own things that they've studied. Everyone's different there, right? From rather than going to a church where, yeah, everyone's different, but it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like there's some sort of governing principle that says like, yeah, you can kind of play around, but this is ultimately this church doctrine. This is what this church does. These are the days that we meet. We're really governed by the world system. It's a lingering truth. So I just wanted to make that clear. I just wanted to explain that when I do this, it's not just another thing. It's not just another church camp. Some people might consider it. They might just say, oh, you're just another religion. You're just another sect. You're just another this. Oh, everyone thinks that they're special. Yeah, but you can participate in all these things and you can see the difference. I mean, I've visited just for fun, just on my own, when I had maybe a church that I was like going to as a student. I still would visit these other places. I would visit. I visited a Jewish facility, like I don't know if you call it a synagogue, but like a center. I visited these other places. I've seen these other things. I've been to like a Lutheran church when I would usually never go to those, but I've been to one. And there's something common that I see in all these people. Even though they're different, there's something common that I notice that they don't really understand. They don't really talk about. They don't really genuinely understand, like genuinely know what they're fully doing. They're sort of playing like this mind game. You can tell they're still doing something by tradition rather than by truth. When I go to these feasts, there might still be some of that aspect sometimes, but it's on a different. It's on a different level. It's much less of that. It's more independent minds, more. It's a special time. I'll just put it that way. It's a very special time. And I don't think I'm going to forget it. the special times that I've had. So, God can do things special. So if man creates a holiday, say Christmas is not a true holiday, say we celebrate the Messiah's birth by the new moon instead of by Christmas, right? God's not really going to do all these things. You're going to see maybe satanic things or dark things happen, or people are going to do all this business and stuff, on these days like Christmas or something. So things on the Gregorian calendar, things that were never commanded. And you're going to see people defending it. But the reasoning that they use to defend it is not good. It's not constructive. It's actually to protect themselves. It's just say like, no, I'm doing it, but you'll see them, they're going to act like they're defending themselves, but they're really trying to push themselves above somebody else. Whereas when you see people going to these feasts or going to these, celebrating these holidays or respecting these holidays that God commanded, you see that God does things that we don't even plan. Like we're not even in charge of this. We're not deciding what happens. There's no group or church or agenda that controls things. You see that it's like raw nature itself. We're saying like we're casting the lots, and God builds something. God makes connections and shows you things that you never thought you'd learn. Like it's like surprise. It's surprise time. It's like, wow, you won't even necessarily feel surprised, like scared surprised. It's not like that. I'm just saying it's more like nature, right? It's instead of going and learning from a school, say, it's like, let's say you want to learn about plants. It's like, instead of going to the school and having like the school dictate to you, like these are plants and blah, 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 from a textbook. It's like, instead of that, you go out and you like start learning and touching the plants, and you start interacting with the real plants outside. You're like living in nature. It's kind of like that. Like that's sort of like what it is, the difference. I mean, I don't know how else really to explain it. Like sometimes, and I'm not just saying like you have to learn by doing and not by watching or not by reading. It's like, no, you should read. But when you're reading, like, what are you actually doing? Like, what's actually going on? And what's the limitations on those textbooks, for example, right? What if there's a plant out there that you can find and you can touch, and the textbook doesn't explain everything about it? What, like, it doesn't know? What if it was never classified or something, right? There's certain things where you can try to explain it in a textbook, but it would be hard to. Like, what does the texture feel like? You know what I mean? Like, so there's that. And this whole thing with, Charlie, and then they had this whole Sunday church, like when Benny was saying, hey, we're at Charlie's church today. Charlie was trying to keep a Sabbath that he believed that God commanded, right? So he believed, his understanding was that the Sabbath was on Saturdays, right? And there's evidence that the Sunday system was created by the Vatican and all this stuff. It was basically, you can show that it was sort of a way to assert authority over Jesus, over God, and say, no, the church is more important, and I'm not going to get too much into like all these prophecies related to the whore of Babylon and all that, right? But come on, you should respect him for what he believed. You should respect what he stood for and not twist it into something else. Because if you twist it into something different, into something else, what's really going on here? It's just something I gotta bring up. I just gotta mention that. If he passes away and he's not here anymore, but that he stood for that. He stood for, I'm going to turn my phone off on a Friday evening until the next evening. He did that because he believed in resting and not going on social media and having to deal with all these things every seventh day, on the seventh day. So the least you could do to respect him, to show any memorial to him, is to do that, is to at least acknowledge that. But not to say, hey, this is a Sunday morning and this is Charlie's church day. We're having a church day for Charlie. What's really going on there? What's actually happening there? Seems strange. It seems like something is not right about that. But God's going to have his way. Okay, he's going to have justice. And people say justice and mercy. Oh, that's another thing they preached on that day. They said, you do not want God's justice. I'm so glad I can have God's mercy instead of God's justice. Well, then what is Micah 6:8? Because it says to be, in the same verse, says to be humble and what else? Merciful and just together. Humble, merciful, and just. You want justice? You want to act justly and be merciful, all in the same verse? Then they can't be opposites, right? Because these churches will tell you mercy just means, they'll take all the power out of it. They'll say grace, there's no power to it. It's just magic. It's getting what you don't deserve. And mercy, it's just magic. There's no power. There's no reality to it that's more real than our physical reality. It's not an actual concept other than you just don't get what you deserve, right? Humans are just these things that deserve to be tortured infinitely. And we need a magical mercy to just override that deserving. But we don't need a change to get to heaven. We'll just say, oh, I overrode that, what I deserve, and I'll just take my evil nature, the fact that I don't care about truth, I don't love people fully, I don't care about doing things justly, but I still can just magically go to heaven because I overrode all that. That's not what the Bible teaches, guys. The Bible teaches that the grace is a gift so that you can get salvation because of the grace, right? And the grace is something that changes you. It's not something that just overrides some legal accusation. It's something that gives you power and changes you to become a lawful person. They're against the law. That's the thing. The Bible warns against those who are against the law. They speak out either against the law, the Torah, right? God's law, not man's laws. They're against God's laws. This is why I told you it's so important to make a distinction. They are against God's laws, or they are against the Messiah who represents, by the way, God's laws, right? They're against Jesus. They're against the testimony. They're against whatever. Basically, they're against what's true. Because if you actually look a little deeper, if you break apart the details, what you'll realize is when God speaks, it's true. And when man speaks of something, it fails at some point. It's either not true or it's basically not complete. And it's different. It doesn't have the power of when God speaks. So when somebody has a testimony and they've seen something happen and they've seen, no, this is true, and you reject that and it's the truth, you're rejecting truth. And when God inscribes the law into the sapphire stones, and you have the churches that say, no, you can throw that out. We don't need it anymore. They're doing the same thing that they're doing to Charlie, to Jesus. They're trying to say, oh, Jesus is gone, so now we can start telling everyone, oh, he was saying you don't got to keep this out. No, he kept it. He was showing that they didn't even know how to keep it themselves, because they were saying, oh, you can't take a walk. Oh, you can't eat food from the field. because that's considered harvesting. They would break the Sabbath by forcing others to be in this corrupt system where they were starving to death. They couldn't afford anything. That's breaking the Sabbath, because now what are they going to do? They don't have food on the day they're supposed to just be resting. That's not right. So they would accuse him of healing someone's heart. You're supposed to heal, to restore. Rest is short for restore. And you love your neighbor as yourself. You would want to heal and restore your body when you're sleeping and resting on the Sabbath. You'd want your neighbor. So why is the power of God healing somebody's arm considered a chore? Is that the same as picking up firewood and carrying it? No. So people will twist that and they'll say, oh, no, we don't need to keep the Sabbath anymore because, well, look at Jesus. He healed somebody's arm, so he's just breaking it. Like, I don't know if that's what they're thinking, but like, that's not right. He's not doing a chore. He's doing exactly what you're supposed to do. And we need to restore that cycle, that power. And it doesn't matter what I think. I could tell you, oh, you should stay inside all day and not start any fires and blah, 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 blah. But if I stop you from doing something that God actually wants you to do on the Sabbath, which, by the way, I believe is not going to be like a chore or a job, work sort of business, but it is going to be something that God wants to do. It's going to be something that God needs to be done. Then I'm not the authority on that. God is. Right? You got to do what he ultimately wants. And that's something that Jesus was pointing out. He said, I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. Don't get everything backwards. People think that the gold of the temple is worth more than the temple, right? So we as humans, we don't let anyone tell you, okay, well, if you're going to keep those Old Testament laws, you have to go to Jerusalem and blah, blah, blah. No, you don't. What does it say? Does it say you have to go to a dead building? Or does it say that you have to go where God's presence is? See? So anyone tells you, oh, you have to sacrifice animals just because you keep the Sabbath. Okay, so using that logic, you'd also have to, by the way, sacrifice animals if you believe in not stealing or not lying or not murdering or loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But okay, but let's examine that more. What were the animal sacrifices actually for? Because people say, oh, it's ceremonial law. No, the Bible doesn't talk about that. What were they for? They were for a shadow. We'll say, okay, yeah, they were a shadow. So after Jesus died, you don't need it anymore. No, that's actually not what it says. If you think about the temple as a shadow of our temple, right? Jesus said he would rebuild the temple in 3 days. And then what does it say in the Bible as a footnote? Not the footnotes somebody added to the Bible, but the Bible's own footnotes. That's in the scriptures itself, in the verse itself, says that he was talking about his body, right? And they're thinking he's talking about the building, a physical building. Now, which one is more real when it comes to a place that God can live? Do you think God created us with a part inside of our heads, because think about it. If we have a brain that just fires neurons, right? We're the same as robots, just with a more advanced neural network, right? There's nothing special about us. But if we have a way to interact with God, where would that be? Would it be in your hand? Would it be in your foot? Would it be like a higher dimension where it just kind of like he magically picks different neurons to fire, and then those different firing neurons are like, oh, that's communicating with God? No, there's a natural connection. This is why you have the two covering, right? That two angels that look just like the brain. There's a real temple. We're physical bodies. And people they're still not getting this. They're still not getting this. And it's just, this is why you have to purify logic. You can't A lot of people reject logic because they say logic will make you have false conclusions. Well, then it's not correct logic. This is why you have to have correct logic. Correct logic can only give you correct conclusions. If it doesn't, then it's not correct logic. So they don't know what logic is yet. They haven't even studied it yet because they haven't properly understood what it is. Correct logic. Notice how in math, if you do the math correctly, it's impossible to get the wrong answer. It's the same thing with this, with the logic. If you're actually doing it correctly, you have somebody who says, oh, you can't use logic to figure all that stuff out, then either it's not symbolic, it can't be represented in logic because there's too much, because it's infinite, or their logic is wrong, which means that it's not logic. It's not genuine logic. It's a fake. It's false, and that's not genuine logic. So logically, I mean, you have to conclude these things. You have to come to these conclusions. You have to realize the body's. I mean, the Bible says it though. It says I don't have to argue logic with someone. You can read it in the Bible. It says the temple he was talking about was his body. There it's written. You don't have to do all these extra steps. It's just written there. So it already proves what you can logically conclude, right? It already, I can use all this logic to prove why the body is a temple, but it already says it there. So I don't even have to do that. It already shows, but that's the thing that people don't get. The Bible is verifying that the logic was correct, or it's showing that the logic was not incorrect, at least. But let's not get into that too much. So they want to rebuild their physical temple, right? What is the animal sacrifices for? What does it actually say that they're for? You got to read the context. When does it say somebody has to kill animals? Does it say specifically when and where? Is it for the temple? Is it for... That's what you have to look up. You have to decide for yourself on these things. What is it actually talking about? Because like I said before, the Pentecost did not